Hi everyone, and welcome to your first lecture of the semester, Becoming the Just Us Performance Troupe. And we're going to talk about autoethnography for social justice, which is the creation of narratives for our cultural impact. We will be performing live for an audience as our culminating project this semester. So first, I want you to understand autoethnography as a research method. And if you have taken research methods with me, this will be a bit of a review. So, this idea of around 1715 began the pursuit of positivism during the Enlightenment. And it was this idea that since we could understand how atoms move, since we could understand how the inside of the human body functioned, since we could understand how nature around us worked and predict how these things would happen, that we could also predict human behavior through very careful study of experiments designed to then be able to be replicated to show this is how humans act and respond to certain situations. We learned over time that human beings are not like atoms. We tend to be a bit irrational. We tend to do things that don't make sense. We can change our minds and be unpredictable. That said, there are still social scientists who pursue this idea of being able to predict behavior as much as they possibly can. So there's the idea of this post-positivism, that we cannot predict human behavior as well as we can predict other elements of the natural world, but we can get a pretty close prediction if we have closed experiments. Now, there were researchers that pushed back. Phenomenology, interpretism, critical analysis said truth is radically subjective. It's tied to individual embodiment, to the context people are in, the power structures that are created that cause people to act in different ways depending on where they are in relation to whom they are going to be interacting with. And while we cannot predict behavior, if we deeply observe, interact, listen to people, we can understand how people from relatively similar cultural locations and embodiments that are read similarly in our world through their demographics, of how they understand and produce identity, meaning, and knowledge. So there's the idea that there is no fixed truth we can uncover, but we can understand human beings as they constantly evolve. So one of the ways that we did pursue what it means to be human and understand different cultures is through classic ethnography. And this emerged from anthropology, but crosses into multiple disciplines, where we can go observe a culture from a distance and report back to our own culture. Now, this did not require collaboration. In fact, it was the idea is you didn't want to get too emotionally involved, too emotionally invested, because it might cloud your judgment. It was this idea that you wanted to make sure you had distance between yourself and the people you were researching. But then came critical ethnography. And they said we don't have to go to the depths of jungles that we've never been or across oceans to lands we've never seen. We can deeply understand people around us. And one of the primary people who did this was Dwight Conquergood. He was working at a university in Chicago, and he went down the street and decided to live in a government project building for a year and do an ethnography on that building. And he was open that he was emotionally involved. He was invested in being a member of that community and fighting for justice for that community and helping them tell their story. Now, what critical ethnography does is it makes sure that exploitation, sensationalization, can you believe how weird these people are, an oversimplification of clearly this is how all people from this area are, or a withdrawal, being a repulsed or angered or disgusted with research participants doesn't happen. Because what we're looking for is how can we deeply understand, connect, and advocate for these people we're trying to know. So from this idea of how we can understand culture through observing and listening to the stories of others, that we could also study our own stories to understand culture. And autoethnography is the study of self to understand culture and relationships to others. So this idea that you look at yourself, your stories, the ones that are meaningful to you, and how do we understand what it means to be you, your cultural location, your demographic in that situation in relationships to others. And we seeing the struggle to create meaning. How can we understand who we are? How can we understand who others are? How do we perpetuate knowledge we already had? How do we try to resist meanings? How do we try to break stereotypes or break prior understandings through encounters? So that's what we're doing with autoethnography. We use our story to gain insights in culture, power, privilege, identity. So it is a merging of art and social science. You want strong, accessible storytelling. It's got to be a great story. People love stories. Stories are how we organize our lives. We have all these experiences and we take moments of them with beginning, middles, and ends that we decide to tell other people. It's got to be a great story, and we'll learn how to be great storytellers and what those elements are. It's also rigorous cultural analysis in pursuit of social justice. And I'll talk to you a little bit in a minute what I mean by social justice. But it is this idea that we're looking to understand culture to make it more open, more safe, and more empathetic for more people. And also the phenomenological lived experience. And phenomenological is this idea that you, within your body, become an expert, creating knowledge of what it means to be you in the world with others. And only you have seen the world exactly through your eyes. So with rigorous reflexivity, which means analyzing the power relations, the stereotypes, the different kinds of things that were emerging around you, that we can understand deeply what it means to be human, what it means to connect with other people, and what it means to make the world a better place. So, social justice. We hear this term a lot. It has lots of different meanings. I'm going to talk to you about what it means in this class, in this moment, for the research and performance we are doing and creating. So, the pursuit of a culture where every member can safely reach their utmost potential despite their social location and embodiment. So while we know that having a lot of money, being a member of a dominant social group, being an embodiment that is valued and seen as persuasive, as normative, as beautiful, all of these things can mean in some ways that we get privileges, which are unearned advantages that just come from being in the body we're in. They also can come with marginalizations of people assuming, based on how they understand us and our social location, that we are not to be valued as much. And because we aren't as valued, we might not be given those opportunities or a safe space to reach our potential. And so social justice is creating a world that no matter what body we're in, no matter how society interprets that body, no matter how society interprets our social location, that we are able to safely and productively reach our true potential. So, and as true potential, I should say too, our utmost potential. So this idea of what potential is and how much potential people have is often very much rooted in power and privilege and marginalization. So again, this is always up for interpretation. So when I think about different kinds of locations can be, social locations and identities can be the expectations, the perceptions, the judgments of one's race, one's gender, one's sexuality, one's disability, one's size, one's nationality, one's social class. So there's all these different kinds of identity markers we have in life, and it goes way beyond this list, etc. Means there's so many more different kinds of identities we have, and how people see that body, see that identity, and how they interpret us. So Self-reflexivity is turning storytelling into research, attending to one's own personal, social, and cultural location. Own one's cultural privileges and one's marginalities. You have both. There are some unearned advantages you have in life, in certain contexts and the bodies you're in. There's also marginalities where people assume things, where people push against you, people make judgments about you, and you were not included based on those different kinds of moments in your life, of different interactions. There's also larger systematic ideas of privileges and marginalities where based on your race, based on your gender, based on your sexuality, based on your size, there can be valuing and devaluing of your body and your identity. So you have to think about this idea that all of these sort of privileges and marginalities are not earned, are not justified. They are based in how we as a society have structured power and privilege and rejection and stigma. So we'll learn more about that as the semester goes on. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what makes a good story. You need to have people depicted as characters. We need to be able to understand and access these different people, both you and the other people in the story. Have some sort of tension that is driving the story. What is happening that caught your attention that needs to be highlighted? There should be a temporal moving of events and then a point or moral of the story of what we learn. Now this can be more metaphorical or poetic or literal. So there could be this idea that you have a classic story you tell. Some students say, I don't want to give all these details. I'm going to do more metaphorical. I'm going to do more poetic and have it more be understanding the feeling and the location without specifics. And you'll see both kinds of choices in the performances you will watch from past years. So why do we do it? Why do we tell our stories? Why do we engage in autoethnography? First, accessibility. More people would engage with a story in deeper, meaningful ways than with traditional researchers. In fact, most of my research is read by other researchers, where when I've done TEDx talks, when I've done performances, those are engaged with a lot more different kinds of people, right? I think of how many people stop me and say, I heard the stories you were telling on public radio. I'm so moved. Or I saw your show. I heard your poetic performance. All of these things. And in so many ways, these people are not researchers. They haven't read my research, but they've seen my performances. And that's something that really allows us to connect understandings and research with audiences that may never read a written report. Also, empathy. We're able to know one another in ways that foster connection. Stories stay with us. They're how human beings organize their lives, their histories, their cultures, and the stories we tell to each other stay with us more than if you were to give a lecture, or you were to give a report, or you were to give a speech trying to persuade people to see the world from your perspective. The story itself can do that and can be the utmost kind of persuasion. And that's why you really want to learn how to do this well, because if you want to persuade people, you have to be a wonderful storyteller. A lot of my students have moved on to become lawyers, to work in advertising, to work in marketing. And they always tell me, even a few students who have become medical doctors, they say, the way you taught me to tell stories is how I connect with my clients, with a jury, with a judge, with those in my life that I need to persuade to see things from my perspective. So there is this idea that you want to make sure that you can foster empathy. I have a student who took one of my entry-level classes. He is now a doctor, and he's found the best way for him to connect with a parent, to persuade them of how they need to adjust their parenting to keep their child safe, is to tell them stories of other parents. And he says, I learned that skill through taking COM 211. And last, social change. we are able to glimpse how we can change the world to make it more inclusive for more people. And then there's this idea of the utopian performative. And the utopian performative by Jill Dolan tells us that through listening to a story, we can imagine a world that is better than the world we're in, where that story, perhaps if it's a story of marginalization, wouldn't happen, or if it's a story of hope, where that would just be a reality. So we really can envision a more inclusive, just world when a person is there. There's also this idea that body to body, when you're hearing a story, it's difficult to deny the reality that is living in front of you in a way you may feel comfortable denying a statistic. So let's talk about the venues for autoethnography for social justice. There is written form. People have formal publications, social media posts, blogs, or live and recorded storytelling for an in-person or virtual audience. And again, body to body, it is difficult to dismiss the reality of the story in front of us, which is why we decide to be in a public space and tell these stories to a live audience to see the power of that connection that happens when we tell stories of our lives to others. So, together, we will create an autoethnographic performance for social justice. You will create your individual scripts through prompts we have throughout the semester once we're meeting together. We will convert these stories into a series of very small acts that will create an ensemble performance where you come together. Sometimes you'll tell your story by yourself. Sometimes we'll take other members of the class and they'll become characters and it'll be more of an ensemble. And we will create a 45-minute performance. We will produce and advertise the performance. And we'll have a talk back on our process and implications with the audience afterwards. So that is what this semester will look like. I'm excited for you to delve a little deeper and see some of the other assignments we have to prepare for when we are in person and co-creating an autoethnographic ensemble performance for this semester. Reach out if you have any questions. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'll talk to you soon.